Hello and welcome everyone to Joey's Spotlight, where we're welcoming guests to hop on and discuss animal advocacy rights. And I'm your host, Colleen, joined by the wonderful Scott Fine, the other host and founder of Joey's Legacy. And we are so excited to welcome today's guest, Debra Hamilton.
Good morning, good afternoon, Debra. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm so glad to be here. We've been together for a long time. We've been together pre-Legacy.
4 years this month. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So for those in the audience that don't know, Debra's an attorney, nationally acclaimed animal-focused mediator and educator. She's the author of the book, Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt, How to Use Mediation to Resolve Conflicts Over Animals. And she's host of the podcast, Why Do Pets Matter?, on which I've been a guest 2 separate times. And I kind of consider her the de facto founder of Joey's Legacy. And I have to tell this story, Debra. I beg your indulgence here. I know you've heard it a few times. So back in, it was right around October 2017 when we got started. I was at work one day and someone in the group had given me Debra's name and said, you need to talk to this attorney. She may be interested in what you're doing. And so I said, all right, well, I'll give it a try. I've got nothing to lose at this point. I was ready to give up on Joey's Legacy because I couldn't get anybody to pretty much come on board, either vets or attorneys for that matter at that point. So I decided to use my 30-minute lunch break at work to go out in my car, in the parking lot, sit in my car, turn on the AC, because no matter what month it is in Florida, it still feels like 100 degrees. So I sat there with the AC on. I called Debra, and Debra was very encouraging. She told me that she liked what my proposal was, what we were trying to do, and she'd be willing to come along with us and be our first attorney, which is exactly what happened. And by the time our conversation was over, it was an hour. So I go, oh, geez, I wonder if I still have a job, because it's a 30-minute lunch. So I went back in, of course, as is typical in that place, nobody noticed, which is fine. So I kept my job, and I had a brighter vision of the potential for Joey's Legacy. So I consider Debra one of the founders, so to speak, of Joey's Legacy, and I'll always be grateful to you for that. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your history?
Well, it's so heartwarming to remember that day when you called and we talked about Joey's Legacy and what your vision was and crafting what would go forward. I'm a recovering litigator. I don't litigate anymore because I find where animals are concerned, litigation really doesn't satisfy anyone's needs. So I mediate these conflicts between people over animals. It's been a journey because some don't really want to mediate. However, it really works so much better. So now I mediate conflicts between people over animals. And when I started, and we had that conversation, I was talking about allowing people to tell their story, which Joey's Legacy is you, Scott, telling your story, which is what most people want to do and are thwarted to doing when they litigate, because either their attorneys take over the conversation or they aren't really feeling as if they're being heard, or worse, they're being shut down when they try to talk. So that's why I always feel having a neutral in the room that allows everyone to speak in a respectful way to each other when situations arise is really important, which is why I started this crazy ass practice that I'm in, because I'm one of maybe a handful, and I think I'm the only one who doesn't litigate anymore, because I really feel that if you want to litigate, that's what somebody else is going to do, and they're going to take your solution out of your hands, which is what I love about mediation. And of course, mediation doesn't stop you from suing. You can always sue after mediation, not after arbitration, but after mediation, you can sue. I mean, it's very hard to sue after arbitration. So I started this practice in 2010 after being a litigator. I was an assistant district attorney in Westchester County, and then I was in private practice for a number of years and thought I would just start litigating again. And I had taken a few years off to care for my kids and realized that being part of the PTA is sort of like talking to people who are in conflict all the time. So I really learned this skill before I knew I learned this skill. So I opened my practice to mediation. And now when my husband asks, or I'm asked, and my husband answers now for me, because when I began this practice, my husband said, "What is conflicts over animals? What are you doing?" And I said, well, just think about in this world where conflicts don't arise involving animals, trust and estates, landlord-tenant, divorce, breeder, owner, handler, groomers, kennels, veterinarians, because dogs are in every part of our life. So if they're in every part of our life, conflicts can arise between us, our pets, and someone else. So that's why I mediate these conflicts. And now my husband is explaining to people, it's really fun, what I do. I don't have to do it anymore because now he gets it and he realizes that it really is something that is much needed, at least as your first step. Especially early, because most of the clients who come into my office, their first statement is, I just don't want this to happen to anybody else again. But with the continued pushback of litigation and the disrespect and lack of taking accountability or responsibility, it escalates. And so your amygdala takes over. So I try to have everyone get back into their prefrontal cortex and have a conversation.
Okay, so take, for example, someone like me, and I think I'm one of the typical ones as far as members of our group in terms of mindset. I come to you and you propose the mediation, and my first thought is you're going to have to bring in two guys bigger than me if you're going to get that vet to sit opposite or at the other side of the table, because I like the idea of mediation, a peaceful way to resolve the conflict. But what would you say to me? Would you say you're not a good candidate for this because you're too angry? Or would you say, here's a couple of tips to try to keep things under control? What would you say to someone like me? Having said that, I know there are a lot of people in the group whose veterinarians did not try to cover up any negligence. They were totally forthcoming. And these are the people that said to me, hey, you know what? They were honest. They told me what happened, exactly what happened. I feel they were honest with me. I think I could find a path to forgiveness. Some people in the group are like that. Those that have been betrayed and lost a pet are not. So what would you say? Would you just say you're not a good candidate for this? Or how would you handle them in my situation?
Well, Scott, I think in your situation, and like many of your listeners' situations, the response of the veterinarian is key, whether or not you're able to sit in a room and talk to someone. So I'm sure that at the beginning, when all of this was occurring, if your veterinarian had open and candid conversations with you, it might have turned out differently and we wouldn't have had to have two strong men come in and hold you back. I'm not sure. However, what usually happens is, and I just got off the phone with a colleague in the state of Washington who wants to work with me on a new project that we're creating that I'll tell you a little bit about later, but we enable veterinarians to have that conversation. So I work with veterinarians as well because I'm a mediator. I do both sides of the track. And so I talk to them. In fact, I just spoke to a group in Australia and in Hawaii and said to them, you need to listen to your client. You need to come back with solutions. You need to take responsibility and accountability. And the overwhelming response from vet practice groups, where veterinarians all come together to chit chat is, I wish I'd known this years ago. I wish I knew I could have talked to my client. I wish I knew I could have just listened and really been empathetic and take accountability and responsibility for the things that I see, and then have a conversation for the things that we disagree about. What happens is that never occurs. So in your situation, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, but I'm old and I sometimes remember, if you're shut down by the veterinarian, you're either ignored, which is bad enough, but then if the insurance company gets involved because the veterinarian has been told, don't talk to your client and call the insurance company. several insurance companies will tell them, don't talk to them, send them to us. And then if any of your listeners, many, I'm sure, have talked to the insurance company, out of the box, the insurance company says you have no case, go away. Well, if you want to infuriate someone, just tell them they have no case. You haven't even spoken to them. You haven't heard their story. Remember, I said before, if everyone gets the chance to tell their story, then they feel as if, you know, they are honoring this animal that they loved, that something befell, right? So for me, mediation is that thing that should happen in a way that enables the veterinarian to come to the table, the client to come to the table, and to limit that amount of time and that amount of response from both irate patients, clients, right? So you might not have an out-of-body experience, and when you get home, you go, oh my God, I really did, you know, I didn't even give him a chance to speak. I just told him how shitty he was and he killed my dog and blah, blah, blah. And I never gave an opportunity to speak. And if that was you, if the tables were reversed, you'd be like, well, I'd really like to, you know, tell you what happened if you listen, but you may not be able to listen because this is your beloved animal and something happened to it. So your amygdala takes over, right? And you are just going to fight or flight, mostly fight if it's your pet. And then the prefrontal cortex may come back when you're home, and you might think, ooh, I probably shouldn't have said that, or ooh, I probably should have let him say something, or ooh, but it's too late, right? And all of us being able to take a step back is very difficult. So in the book, Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt, I used 3 tools. One is stop, drop, and roll. So those are the 3, stop, drop, and roll. So stop talking and listen. Because if you listen, you can actually find out what is going on. If you can facilitate that conversation, drop the need to be right because you are. I never tell anyone they're wrong because this is how they're perceiving this incident. And so I'm not wrong. I'm seeing it this way. That's based on my bias. That's based on my experience. It's based on my perspective and perception. It's based on the day I had in the morning, whatever. So you are right, but if you listen, you may be able to find common ground on which to move forward. And then finally, let what people say roll off your back. So with clients who unload on veterinarians, I tell them, let it roll off your back. Often I have clients who, when they don't add fuel to the fire by saying, Scott, I know that the loss of Joey was terrible, but I did everything I could and there was nothing we could do. And, you know, there's nothing you can do with respect. I always say to my veterinarians, get the butt out of your head. So you get your head out of your butt, because acknowledging that the loss of Joey was, you know, so emotionally killing, right, is enough. Put a period on it. I know that this was not how any of us wanted this to turn out. And if someone starts the conversation that way, there is more of a path toward taking accountability and responsibility than if we say, well, no one wanted this to happen, but we did everything we could. I tell vets all the time, please put a period after this was not what we had hoped would happen.
Okay, so tell us about the mediation process. What percentage of veterinarians participate? And
well, that's a really good, go ahead.
Compare the cost to litigation.
So that's a really good question. The costs are much, much less because it usually the costs are borne by both parties equally, or in the case of the Royal Vet College over in the UK, the Royal Vet College pays for it, and the veterinarians and clients come in and the mediators come in independently. They're not part of the Royal Vet College to hear the issues and attempt and usually succeed. It's got a really big success rate. It was actually Jenny Jones who started it in 2017. The first year it was like an 85% positive rate of allowing mediation to happen at the outset, at the beginning when the disagreement arose, and it's steadily gotten more acceptance. You really have to be careful in those situations that the mediators remain neutral, because if you're getting paid by somebody, it's often seen, whether it's truthful or not, that, you know, I'm beholding to, you know, so-and-so vet, say if the AVMA paid for it. So we're beholding to the AVMA. So that's what we're always going to find for the vet. It's sort of when people go to license reviews, they go, well, you know, they're beholding to all the vets because they're reviewing it, but vet should lose its license. Mediators are supposed to be neutral. The mediation process is supposed to be voluntary. So you have to decide to do it. You have to go there with a willingness to listen, with a willingness to take accountability and responsibility for your part in the conflict. So if you went off the handle and called everybody every name in the book, take accountability and responsibility for it, because, you know, we all have really, really bad days. And as a veterinarian, take responsibility for what happened or occurred, or at least for the lack of information, whatever it is, because you want to make sure that you can facilitate a conversation, and then you move toward resolution. And what I love about mediation, as I said before, is it doesn't take your ability to litigate away if things don't work out, if you can't come to a resolution, or if money is the issue, right? How much should I get back? Usually my mediations end with everyone being happy, not one, you know, both of them being angry. So we're both equally angry. That's not the process I look for. I look for everyone being equally happy with the outcome. And when it comes to money, sometimes that's very important to a client. Sometimes the apology is even more important. And I find, Scott, that one of the big things in mediation that has worked really well for me is enabling the client to be part of the solution so it never happens again. Because if their pet, something happened to it because it fell out of a top crate and it was a little dog, right? So the vet would bring in the client and say, what do you think we should do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And even if the vet has already thought of never putting a little dog in a high crate before, being able to be part of that conversation is incredibly impactful, because my friend Jeremy Cohn, I'm sure he's been on, says the thing he hates the most is how people feel guilty about what happened to their dog, that they didn't do something to save their dog's life.
Right.
Well, if they are part of that solution, much more than just having a conversation, but also being part of the solution is huge and makes people feel so much better. And that's what mediation provides. It provides you with that platform to be heard on your story, to hear the other side of the story, to find a ground on which to move forward, and to be part of the solution.
So do mediations ever, in addition to a verbal resolution or a meeting of the minds, does a mediation ever result in the vet settling financially? Is the money ever involved in the resolution?
So let me clear up what mediation is, because obviously that I wasn't clear on that. So mediation comes to an agreement, and that agreement is written, and the parties are required to follow that agreement that's written. So this is what we agree to in our conversation. So we agree that I take responsibility. We agree that I take responsibility. We agree that this was the story as we both see it now, and this is what I plan to pay the client for everything that happened here, and then you both sign it, and that is a contract.
Okay.
And so that contract can then be taken to court and enforced if the veterinarian never happens. And it never happens because the veterinarian also feels as if he was heard. He wasn't hung out to dry. He was heard. He took responsibility, he took accountability, he or she, that's terrible of me, took responsibility, took accountability, listened to their client, took steps to make sure it's never going to happen again, and agreed to a financial settlement on their own. The problem arises with the insurance companies that don't allow veterinarians to do this before all the shit hits the fan. Hope I can say that. Because what happens is, they have this back and forth with the insurance company that creates that amygdala response, right? So now I'm never going to talk to the vet. I'm going to need two big guys to even sit in the room with the vet because of these SOBs, insurance companies. They don't like me, but that's okay. That don't want to have a conversation because it's not in their best interest. So I always tell people, the veterinarians are in a really hard place. And I'm not advocating on one side or the other, but they're in a really hard place. They are not as advanced as medical doctors, where they've learned how much an apology works in their favor in the event something happens that was untoward, right? Well, veterinarians, because animals are still property, their thinking hasn't evolved to that point. Not the veterinarian, but the veterinarian malpractice insurance providers have not evolved. And so they don't allow for veterinarians, for the most part, to have a conversation with a client on their own, either in mediation, which is confidential, which is why I always say do it in mediation, because then whatever you say can't be used against you in a future litigation, the veterinarian or the client. So it's really a good process to be within. But even so, if you just are able to have a conversation where everybody sits down, and if you can do it, and if the veterinarian can do it without getting, defensive and reactive, which is almost impossible when pets are involved, you can find a resolution before you go to litigation. However, when you have this third party, the malpractice insurance provider who says, Dr. Smith, we will take it from here. Don't worry. Dr. Smith's hands are tied. He can't call Scott Fine. He can't. He's been told not to. And so even though he'd love to sit down with Scott Fine and have a conversation, he can't. And so, here you are. I know Jeremy has rewritten his demand letter to say, listen, we really just want to have a conversation with the veterinarian, see what went on. We'll do it in mediation. We'll do it, with a confidentiality clause, whatever, so that we can resolve this without litigation. And the insurance companies, some refuse to do that. And so the veterinarian, I proffer, is in a hard place. So he's got his malpractice insurance people telling him one thing, he's got what he wants to do with his clients and another. And if he wants to be represented later on, if you can't resolve it, right? The insurance company is within its rights. Like if you have a car accident, you don't tell your insurance company you had a car accident, and then the guy who said he'd pay for your bumper doesn't show up. You can't then go back to your insurance company and say, hey, I had this accident, because they can say, well, you didn't tell us. So now you've told us, the insurance company has told you not to speak to them. If you speak to them, they can deny coverage for defense of your license before the board or defense in a civil matter.
Okay. All right. I definitely learned some things about mediation that I wasn't aware. Tell us about what a MAP plan is. What is that all about?
Oh, so that's switching gears altogether. So for
Yeah.
everyone who is wondering about conflict and resolution,
Yeah.
you can go to my website and see it.
Okay.
The MAP plan is there as well. So this is my love. So this is my heart and joy. Every Wednesday night at 6:30, I sit down and talk to pet owners about making a plan for their pet. So the MAP plan navigates the journey your pet takes when you can't care for it. Most of us put it only in our will. Well, it doesn't come to fruition unless you die. So during COVID, it was even more important to have a MAP plan, because a number of dogs, especially if you were in big cities, you saw splashed on the tabloid news, New York Post in New York, hazmat suited animal care and control people going into apartments of people who had been in the hospital with COVID, but had made no plan for their pet, because when they went to the hospital, they just weren't feeling well. And then all of a sudden their oxygen levels were at 2. And so they were admitted to the hospital and they'd made no plans for the care of their pets. So their pets were back in the apartment. They live alone. Family isn't in town. They never thought of it. They weren't going to get sick, right? And so animal care and control comes, takes your dogs, and they keep it for a certain statutory period of time, 3 to 5 to 7 days, whatever it is. And then they can release it to a rescue, and then the dog can be adopted. And when you come out of the hospital after COVID, because you can't answer your phone, right? Because you're on an oxygen thing, your dog is adopted and you can't get it back. So I sit there and I say, you need to make a plan. So the MAP plan stands for 4 pieces of the plan. The first one is to obviously make a plan, put it in writing. What do you want to happen to your pet if something happens to you? Where do you want it to go? Who do you want it to go to? So make that plan. Then you have to address the needs of the pet, which means if your pet's on medication, or your pet isn't good with certain kinds of dogs or cats, or if your pet is afraid of thunder, or your pet needs certain food, nobody knows that but you. So you need to address every need of your pet. Put it in writing. Then you need to appoint caregivers. So M, make a plan. A, address the needs of the pet. A, appoint caregivers, and only one can be your family member. And I found this out because the plan was made when I broke my ankle and couldn't care for my dogs. And my husband told me, I'm taking care of you, not the dogs. So I had to find someone to take care of my pets. That was 2013. So only one can be a family member. The other people have to be neighbors or friends or other dog owners that you meet at the dog park, whatever it is, because especially if you have a special needs dog or cat. I have a great friend who said, well, there's no one who can take care of my cat. She's vicious and she's this and she's that. And I go, well, you absolutely need to find someone who can take care of your cat, because otherwise she'll be euthanized if something happens to you. They'll catch her, they'll euthanize her because she'll be unadoptable. So if you have a difficult special needs animal, you really do need to make a plan and appoint caregivers who understand. And then the last P, the last letter is P, which is the most important. You need to publish it. So you need to make sure it's in writing. You need to make sure the people who are going to be your caregivers know about it and each other. Because Scott, if I call you and you're out of town and you can't come and help me with my pets, if I told Colleen, if I was told about Colleen, I could then go to Colleen, or you could call Colleen, say I'm unconscious, and somebody calls and says, hey, I saw your name up on, Debra Hamilton's refrigerator. We just carried her out. But it said, because this is my big thing. So for everyone who's listening, do this right away without stopping. You can even stop listening to us to do this. On your refrigerator, say, in case of emergency, do not take my dogs to animal care and control. Please call one of these 3 numbers and someone will come and take care of my pets, because the last thing you want is for your dogs to walk out that door. That's the last thing you want. Your dogs, your cats, your birds, your horses, your fish, your lizards, your snakes, you don't want them walking out the door. You want them to stay there, but you need to do this legwork before, and you need to publish it. So publishing it on the fridge to say, listen, call these 3 people. And then those 3 people need to know that if something happens to you, they've already said that they take care of your pet. So they have to come forward, and one of 3 of them will be in town. I swear to God. And then you need to make sure that you have the long-term, short-term care. I call it the nosy neighbor factor. So if you have a nosy neighbor, tell them about your plan so they know that there are 3 people on a piece of paper on the refrigerator that if you're being carried out, they tell the police or EMS, listen, don't take her dogs because she's got these numbers, and here they are as well. She gave them to me too. And I'll call those people and make sure they come and take care of her dogs. So your attorney should get it, your vet should get it, because of course, as your listeners probably know, your vet cannot take care of your pet unless the name of that person is in the file and given permission to bring the dog or cat or bird or horse to the vet. So your vet should know, your attorney should know, all the caregivers should know, your nosy neighbor should know, because those are the people who are going to keep your pets at home. So at 6:30 every Wednesday night, you can come and ask me any question you want.
So clearly, it's a great idea. Everybody should have it. And you answered my question, how will people ever know you have a MAP plan? But you just answered it with the P part of the acronym there. So I'm just curious, what percentage of people that you approach or approach you about this actually go ahead and create a MAP plan with you? How many are, oh, nothing's ever going to happen to me. I'm not interested.
I feel like a trusted estate attorney because the same thing happens to them. Nothing's going to happen to me. And I have a list. So it's the 8 Ds, and I hope I remember them all. So there's death, of course. If you die, somebody has to take care of your pets. But if you're married, right, and you have pets, make sure while you still like each other that you figure out how you're going to share your pet, because unfortunately your pet doesn't hate your ex.
Right.
And if you want to keep the dog, when you go on vacation, if your dog hates to go to the kennel, well, then your ex. And there are so many cottage industries that will transport your pet from point A to point B that you don't have to worry about ever seeing your ex again. But your dog would be really happy to go to the ex instead of the kennel. I'm just saying. Right. There's delay. So airlines, traffic, you can't get back to your dog caregiver. What plan do you have to back up your dog caregiver if they have to leave? Disease. If you have cancer, I love it. Every cancer commercial in the universe has a dog. When people come home, like the new Lasta and other commercials, have the dog right there with the person who is receiving the chemotherapy. However, my mom died of bone cancer. And let me tell you, she loved having my dogs there. She loved having my dogs on the bed with her, but she could no more walk the dog or feed the dog. So you need to make sure that if you are ravaged by some disease, short-term, long-term, that you have someone who can help you keep your dogs with you, because you're going to recover much more quickly. Scott, you could probably talk about this. You're going to recover much more quickly if your dogs are with you. You don't have to give them away. I mean, that is really hard. Dementia. So we all know of people who have had pets and had dementia. You need to make a plan, because maybe you can't keep them with you, but wouldn't it be great if whoever takes them could bring them to see you so that you could be grounded? I had a friend with early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, and she wanted one of my Irish setters to stay with her because it was the only time she was grounded and she knew where she was. So it's really important. Deployment, if you're deployed, we all know you need to make a plan, both long-term, short-term, if you're deployed. Disasters, so the fires, the floods, the hurricanes, the tornadoes. If you have a horse, this drives me nuts. If you have a horse and a fire is coming, you better figure out where you're going to go before the fire and the wind shift, because it isn't an easy thing to pack up horses. Now, horses, I guess you could let out of the gates and let them run, and they'll run from the fire and hopefully they'll be saved. If you have a dog or a cat, I mean, how many of us have seen the dogs and cats in the rowboats in the floodwaters, right? I want to take them and shake them. My husband says, please don't take them and shake them. Because if they're forecasting a nor'easter and you live in a flood prone area, all you need to do is make a call to a Holiday Inn or one of the dog friendly hotels about 100 miles from where you are and say, I'd like to make a reservation, and don't do it on Expedia or anything, because you can't cancel it, on the same day before you check in. You have to do it so you can cancel it on the same day before you check in. But you know what? You will have a place to go if, God forbid, something happens and you need to get out of your house. And make sure you get out of your house early. Don't wait for the waters to be up to the doors of your car. Not helpful. And I think I hit them all, but I might have missed a few. I mean, divorce is like the biggest one. No one ever makes a plan. Of course, I'm never going to divorce my husband. Well, when you do divorce, then, the fur flies. And here in New York, they're trying to make sure that they treat animals as members of the family and not just as property, which in and of itself is problematic as well. So it's a huge question. So you want to make that plan. You want to make sure that you know where your pets are going to go short-term, long-term.
So tell us a little bit more about your book, which is called Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt. When did that book come out, and what does it address? I presume mediation.
Well, it addresses how to handle conflicts differently. So I've updated a lot of my processes over the last 5 years since I wrote the book. And except for this move, it would have been already rewritten and updated because of so many cases that I've handled and so much success I've had and what worked and what didn't work. But it's basically still the same. It's having a conscious conversation. It's recognizing when your reactivity or defensiveness is creating a barrier to useful conversation. So I always say, if you feel this coming over you, if you feel reactive and defensive, stop talking and listen. And then if someone is saying something, reflect back what they say. So Scott, you just asked me, tell me a little bit more about the Nipped in the Bud book. And did I get that right? And that really starts to diffuse the heat coming from the other side. So you really want to learn how to stop talking and listen. And when you listen, reflecting back what you hear, and I always say, not in a condescending, prickish way, but rather just in an inquisitive and curious way, because you want to make sure you got it right. You want to give Scott the ability to correct you because sometimes when clients of mine hear what I heard, they go, oh my God, no, I don't want you to think that I'm like that. No, that's not what I meant. I meant this. And so they self-correct. And because we all have our perspectives. And when I hear you say something, I'm going to take my life experience and my biases into defining what it is you said, where you might be totally different. Southerner to northerner, East Coast to West Coast. We all hold different biases and prejudices and perspectives and perceptions about certain things. And I know all of us on this call have probably had someone say, oh, this is what we do in my neck of the woods with this, and you look at them and you go, wow, I can't believe that. Like, we all do certain things that are familial, that our parents did, that someone else would maybe find to be, oh my God, but that's because of our perspective, our perceptions, our experiences. So the book lays out how to go through divorce, through veterinary discussions, through breeder owner handler discussions, through kennels and pets, because all of these conversations are emotional. And mediation gives you the opportunity to address emotion. Litigation does not. What was it? In Legally Blonde, the female law professor said, law is the practice of something without emotion. And I go, oh my God, not in animal law, because animal law is driven completely by emotion.
Right. So is it a fair statement to say that mediations work out a lot better, even though the companion animal parent is part of the emotional gamut that they run is anger, when the veterinarian was forthcoming, truthful, and transparent with the pet parent up front, and versus a situation like mine where we found out shortly after that he decided to alter Joey's records before he sent him to the state, and me going into the mediation with that knowledge. You're dealing with a bad actor, you're dealing with a liar. I mean, is it a foregone conclusion that the honest veterinarian with the pet parent is, you're going to have a better outcome? Or can you somehow,
That's a great question. And, the chicken or the egg question, did he alter the records because he was afraid and didn't feel he had the ability to own up to it because, of what he thinks or thought might have happened?
yes.
I have a podcast, Stacy Santee, where she owned up to the fact that when she was doing a C-section, she cut, I think, a urethra, and she went out and told the client. And the client said, well, I never want you to touch my dogs again, but thank you very much for telling me. Because I think that it's, again, your reactivity, your defensiveness, your perspective, your perception. If you think you can have a conversation and own up and take accountability and responsibility and be respected for that, and not have somebody say, why did you say that? Like your attorney, why did you say that? I think that integrity and forthcomingness on all sides needs to be fertilized and nurtured, because that will be a much better way to figure these things out than to circle the wagons. And unfortunately, still in veterinary medicine, circling the wagons is what's taught in vet school. I'm trying single-handedly, and I swear to you I'm single-handed, to shift that. I mean, all the vets say to me, oh my God, I wish I'd learned this in vet school. I said, so introduce me to your vet school. I'm happy to go and teach this class, because you just need to know how, both veterinarian and pet owner. I teach pet owners too. So if you have a pet ownership group, call me, I'll help you do it. Have a conscious conversation where you don't just react and be defensive and have your amygdala ruling the day. You actually take a breath and think about restoring yourself to, how can we move forward for the benefit of Joey? Because that is actually what you want to do. What gets lost in litigation is the animal. I have to be right, or you have to be right. And I love Amanda Ripley's new book, High Conflict, because it talks about good conflict. I'm not against conflict. I think conflict changes things for the better, but you have to be able to do it in a way that's constructive and not destructive. And of course, Brene Brown always says, I'd like to get it right and not be right. And I think most pet owners, when they are not listened to initially, then need to be right because someone has told them they're wrong. And as I said, drop the need to be right, get it right, and that will benefit your dog in the long run, and other dogs to follow.
So how long have you been doing your podcast? I mean, I was on there twice, and it's been how many years?
So November, it'll be 2 years, and I
Oh,
love every
okay.
minute of that too. I've got some great beside yourself. I have some great guests. Temple Grandin's been on. Dave Nickel, a veterinarian from the UK, has been on. Jim Giswaldi's been on. He's a wonderful animal law attorney who deals in zoos and aquariums. He's got a great book out there, Excellence Beyond Compliance, which of course he and I think the same way. Let's see how we can do a really great job beyond just doing the minimum. And we've had Dave Fry. We've had tons of vets and vet techs and pet owners who've had good and bad experiences. It just is a podcast which lives up to its name. The first question everybody is asked is, why do pets matter to you? Because that drives the conversation, no matter who's having it. It's because the pet matters to you that you're having this conversation. If the pet didn't matter, you'd walk away. But pets matter. And to most of these people, they always go back to their first pet or why they got into the area they've gotten into. There are a number of vet service providers. You know, there's a guy, Mark, and I can't remember his last name and he'll hate me. He's from Vet Vitus, I think. And he wants to create, and believe it or not, vets have pushback on this because they think they'll lose their clients. He wants to create an app for your phone, and I think he's pretty much created it, that you could carry your animals' records with you no matter where you traveled with it, so that if something happened, you could pull up on your phone when the last vaccination was, what their surgical history is, what their chronic issues are, so that you could hand it to that vet in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when you're doing the balloon stuff with your dog or your cat, so that they would have the history. Some vets are pushing back because they think, if I have your records, I have you, which isn't true. But that's a whole change in mindset as well.
Right. All right. Well, we've got
Mark Alcott. Oh God, the brain kicked in.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we've got a few more minutes. So how would you like to conclude? What would you like to say?
Well, I'm so glad that you started Joey's Legacy. I do sometimes worry that people feed off of the negativity, and that doesn't help your process, the process you started, because you really want people to find a way to resolve these issues. I love the setup where veterinarians and attorneys review paperwork to see if there's an issue, and then if they say no, you get a second bite at the apple, which I think is fabulous. But I think that if the website, and I know you've had a few conversations about this on the Facebook page, if you are having an issue, let's try to be problem solvers, not problem igniters, or proliferators of problems, because we're never going to get to a resolution if we're reactive, defensive, or if we pile on. It's the one thing about the internet that is difficult, that people pile on and ignite even more so the pain of people who have lost pets. Finding a solution, working that problem to a solution is much more soul feeding than perpetuating the pain and agony. Because I know you, Scott, Joey, the pain and agony is huge and was huge. And had there been some place like Joey's Legacy's group to have a conversation where people could empathize with you, could maybe help you work through it, give you the opportunity to take that step back and have a conversation. And then if in my world, the veterinarians would allow the conversations to happen, i.e. that their malpractice insurance companies would allow the conversation to happen in a more fluent way, it would be a great savior to everyone who has lost a pet. But that isn't yet necessarily the norm. There are some veterinarians, and I'm sure some of your people have experienced veterinarians who take accountability, who take responsibility, like Stacy Santee, and then they work it out. And nobody's license is reviewed, and nobody wants to meet them in a dark room and beat the snot out of them. You work it out, and the good thing is that everybody learns. So as Jeremy says, he just wishes he could. I said this before, but it's worth repeating. He wants to make sure that pet owners understand that it's not their fault. So it gives the pet owner the ability to remember, recognize, and release that feeling that they didn't do enough, that they let something happen to their pet, that they should have been there, because they did everything they could given the circumstances, and they did what they thought was right in the moment. And 2020 hindsight is 1,000,000%. Yet that wasn't the information you had at the time, nor was it the choice you made. And beating the snot out of yourself for doing that, Jeremy always says to me, just drives him nuts, because he wants to make sure that pet owners know that they did the best they could with the information they had that moment. And though they have different information now, don't beat yourself up. But the outcome of having a really civil conversation is, now you know what questions to ask. Now you know to stop and say, wait a minute, I think I need a second opinion. I think that's Jeremy's biggest thing. He goes, I just wish everybody would go for a second opinion. You do, if you're sick, why don't you do it if your pet's sick? And don't go to the colleague in the practice, say, listen, I'd like to go to another practice, and yeah, it costs money, I get it. But God, I had a client whose dog was treated for cancer because the lab got it wrong. And then its kidneys and liver were compromised because it had taken cancer medications, and it was a 3-year-old dog. Well, you know what? The lab took responsibility and accountability for it, and paid her a sizable sum for not only the care that she received from the vet, but also for future care, because the dog's going to have long-term effect from the chemotherapy. So if you have a conversation, if you are able to have a fruitful conversation, it makes everybody better. And P.S., I think that lab probably is checking cancer things twice now.
So I think it's important to note, Debra, and for everyone listening, and a lot of the people listening, I think already know this, and you may already know this, but the majority of people that come to our group and want to join state they've never had a bad experience with a vet. They came to learn and advocate for their own pets in a more, in a much better way. And I'll also tell you, as far as the negativity you mentioned, that's obvious, but I'll also tell you that I can't recall maybe almost no victims of veterinary malpractice have come to me and said, this happened with my dog. The vet came out. I could see the tears in his or her eyes. I could empathize with them. They were totally truthful and transparent. I've never had someone in that position say, but I don't care. I'm suing them anyway. Right. I'm going to Yelp. Okay, that only happens when the element of duplicity comes in. So when you see that negativity, it's because people like myself have been lied to, have been betrayed, have been denigrated in that way, where you've taken the life of my family member, of my son, of my daughter, and now you're going to lie to me about it, about what happened. That's where the anger and the emotion and the negativity comes in. So personally, in that respect, I support that negativity, because put it this way, if more veterinarians didn't want to cover their behinds and were more truthful and transparent, Joey's legacy wouldn't be nearly as big as it is and as prominent as it is. It's all about the lying and the duplicity and the dishonesty of some of these vets. And again, the majority are honest enough with their clients, but I will never downplay that negativity. It needs to be there.
And I have to agree with you that the negativity, or rather the pushback, because someone maybe came out with tears and said, I'm so sorry, and then doctored the records afterwards. So they gave you both the emotional piece to assuage any future issues, but then when future issues arose or whatever, they changed records, like in your case. There's no going back from that. If you are
Right.
not taking accountability and responsibility from the get-go, you aren't being forthright, both as a pet owner and a veterinarian, then making sure that that is pointed out is clear. It's how you point it out, whether or not you're going to get closure. So if you pound the shit out of somebody and go to litigation, I can tell you that most of the time, the outcomes do not satisfy the parties who are really hurt by all of this.
Right.
If you choose to take the time and point out where this is what occurred, i.e. you falsified the records. You came out and told me you were so sad about, let's say, Joey dying, and then you went in and falsified the records so that it didn't show that you did anything wrong. How do you think you would feel if that happened to you?
Right.
And being able to have someone recognize the conduct that created this negativity, take responsibility for it then, and really teach them a lesson, so to speak, in how to be integrity again. How to have integrity and how to take responsibility is key. And you're not going to help someone take responsibility if you pound the daylights out of them. You really need, because obviously they have a lack of integrity and a lack of a desire. I don't know what occurred in their life that made them think that that would be an okay thing to do. Either they were told in vet school or somebody in their practice told them to do it so they could CYA. CYA as a veterinarian only comes back to bite you in the ass. So you really need to recognize that that's never going to be good. Some people might not take you to court if you CYA because they don't have the funds, but they certainly will go on social media to share that Dr. Smith did this. And I have a lot of veterinarians who call me and say, what am I going to do to shut this down? And I said, well, you're going to say, I'm sorry that this occurred. This is, your perspective. Let's have a cup of coffee. Because they really need to understand why it is you needed to put on Facebook that they did this, this, and this. They can't run and say, I didn't, that's again, that but word, right? But we didn't do that. Well, yeah, that's how this person perceives what you did. So you need to understand what you did that created this negativity and fix it.
Absolutely. All right, Debra Hamilton, great guest, great conversation. We'll see you again, hopefully soon. And maybe you'll have another book written by then.
Oh, I'm sure I will. And
Good.
Everyone who's listening, don't forget, every Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, come join us. It's a great community. We check in with everybody on how their dogs are doing. And we also gently nudge you to make that plan, which you don't want to make because nothing's ever going to happen to you. However, history belies that, to make sure you have that plan so your pets don't end up in a situation you never intended them to end up in.
So how can people contact you either by phone, by website, or any other way?
Well, the best way to contact me is info@hamiltonlawandmediation.com. But also you can just Google Hamilton Law and Mediation, and everything will come up. And at the top of the page is where you sign up. It's free for the MAP call, and you'll just get a link and you can log on and you can talk or not. I usually ask everybody who their dog is and what kind of dog they are and why they're there. And if they have any questions, and we talk about everything from traveling with your dog to who should be the caregiver for your dog, how you should write that down, who should get a copy. It's always a lot of questions, a lot of answers, and gets you to really understand and consider that your dog is relying on you to navigate their journey if something happens to you. So that's why you need to make a map.
Cool. Colleen, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just very thankful for all your insights today. I've definitely learned a lot. I'm going to have all my friends and family make a map. I really appreciate you providing that sense of facts and logic and reason, because a lot of us come from an emotional spot, and that's to be expected. But to have somebody who can help, bring a little bit more of like, well, let's sit down and discuss this is really beneficial, I think, for all of us to keep in mind. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's holding a safe space so you can really have a conversation that's focused on the animal is key.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, Debra, thanks again. And we'll see you guys on Sunday night with the roundtable in Cary Hyde.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.